everyone, and welcome to Piecing It Together with Ben and Annika. I think I did that in the wrong order this time, but I am Ben.
And I am Annika. The order I don't think matters, but we are both here. And we are here talking to people who are cultivating pockets of peace in a world that all too often assumes violence is inevitable. We have another friend and minister with us today. Reverend Brian Ellison is the executive director of the Covenant Network of Presbyterians and the stated clerk of the Synod of Mid-America. So if you are a Presbyterian in Kansas, Missouri, or portions of Illinois, Brian is your clerk. He is also the host and contributor at KCUR, which is NPR's local affiliate in Kansas City, Missouri. Brian, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, yes.
Thanks, Annika. Thanks, Ben. It is really a pleasure. I'm so glad for the opportunity.
Of course. And Brian, before we got on the call, we were chatting about you and I have worked together a little bit in Presbyterian circles, really specifically around General Assembly, which folks listening to me and Ben's Presby speak have probably learned by now. That's our bi-yearly meeting where we get together and duke out what it means to be a Presbyterian. So I know a little bit about your work in that very specific capacity. But I don't know as much about what the rest of the 2 years between when we are working together on GA projects look like.
I just hibernate, actually. There's nothing between General Assemblies for me. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you for being here. That's the end of the episode.
No. Okay, it's all like facials and foot rubs, right? That's the whole time.
Right. That's exactly right. It's probably the best preparation for General Assembly, actually.
Right. Yeah.
That's real. But no, tell us about Covenant Network. What do you do? What does your work as an executive director entail? And what brought you into that world?
Sure. So to start, Covenant Network of Presbyterians is a national organization in the Presbyterian Church, much like Presbyterian Peace Fellowship is. We have been around for 27 years. It was founded back in 1997. I guess that means we're up to 28 years, isn't it? That we were founded in order to confront the recent change in the Presbyterian Church's policy to exclude LGBTQ people from ordained ministry. The organization's founders thought that was wrong and wanted to commit their resources and influence to trying to change that. I think the general way that story is told is that they thought it would take a lot less time than it ended up taking. But as it took longer, the organization had the opportunity to really shape a theological framework around inclusion and to give the church a little more theological vocabulary for talking about sexual orientation and in time gender identity as well. And eventually working together with other groups and with folks around the church, the Covenant Network and the church did change that policy in 2011, approved same-sex marriage in 2015. There was consideration at that time, well, maybe the work of the Covenant Network was done. Maybe we had checked off the box and we could, get back to normal or something. But that isn't actually a good reflection of where the church was at. We had made those changes to policy, but we were a long way from really living into those changes, from really seeing a church that was authentically and effectively welcoming and affirming of LGBTQIA plus people. And so the organization not only continued, but sort of recommitted itself to a mission of living into the church's, the promise of those church policies, the promise of a new day. I became executive director back in 2012, so that's between the decisions on ordination and marriage, and have been ever since. As executive director, it's kind of interesting. We're not a huge staff. I do have a couple of great colleagues who work on communications and operations for the organization. But we rely a lot on our board of directors, which is 24 people all over the country, and on volunteers and on the members of the 450 or so churches that make up the Covenant Network of Presbyterians. And my job as executive director is to kind of coordinate and lead that mission together with the board. I I do a lot of preaching and a lot of teaching around at churches around the country. We also develop a lot of resources, a lot of uh, written materials, a lot of web resources, videos. We work in collaboration with other organizations in the church and even with denominational entities these days, because of course there was a time when we were kind of shouting from outside about why the church needed to change. Now we actually support the mission of the church in this area, and so we're really trying to help it be as effective as it can. And so we partner with groups like the Theology and Worship Office, or the APSE, the Association of Partners in Christian Education, and the Office of Older Adult Ministries. We have worked with a lot of groups to try to strengthen the ministry of the church, and its partnerships around the world as well.
So first of all, Brian Ellison is one of my favorite Presbyterians. So if I made a list of 10, he would be on that list.
He'd make your MySpace top
right.
8 Presbyterians.
Only warms my heart.
Yeah, I mean, I think in part because we're both stated clerks. It's a thing, it's a vibe, right? Anyway, so but one of the things I've always noticed about the Covenant Network, once I discovered it and became a Presbyterian and all that stuff, it is one of the most effective, quiet organizations I've ever seen. And what I mean is, what I've always liked about what Covenant does is that it's not just about, the advocacy, yes, is important, but they also spend so much time knowing the process, right? And understanding the polity, understanding how to get things done within this structure, which as an apologist for Presbyterian structure makes me happy, because I think our structure is designed the way it is on purpose. And I think using it the way that you guys have used it has the ability to not just make policy change, but you were also changing minds along the way. And I think that is really important, right? To understand that this isn't all shouting and this isn't all, intensity. Some of this is just work and relationship. And so has that kind of always been the focus?
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to summarize it. There is something about the Covenant Network's ethos that makes it not so surprising as you might think that a stated clerk is executive director, because to use the way the founding generation of the Covenant Network talked about it, they always framed themselves not as a civil rights organization, not even really as a social justice advocacy organization, but as an organization that was founded to strengthen the ministry of the church, believing that the only way the church's ministry could be authentically strong was for the church to be both united and whole. And so they always talked about unity and inclusion kind of in the same breath. We aren't really united if we are excluding people from the church's life and leadership, but we also aren't really being truly inclusive if what we are including people in is a church that is broken apart and not able to talk to each other, and where people don't see their minds and hearts changed. And so so I think even from its founding, that was part of the Covenant Network's ethos. Taking that kind of position on doing social justice work in the church can open you up to criticism. And there was some that the Covenant Network was too slow. It was too willing to accept compromise. It didn't advocate strongly enough. I wasn't really part of the organization in those early years, but I have a lot of appreciation for what was accomplished in those years. At times when the church's doors were not open to LGBTQ people like me, these were folks who were standing up and incrementally, yes, step by step, yes, strategically, not always just by saying the thing as loudly and clearly as they could. They were able to move us toward progress. And so I am grateful for that. I do think the church is different today, and I think the Covenant Network is different today. I think we are we're a much more diverse organization. We have a lot more LGBTQIA plus people in leadership. We have some different approaches to sort of what amounts to advocacy for inclusion. And yet at the same time, I think that that fundamental part of our ethos is still true. In the end, it is about strengthening the church. We're not just advocating for a group, even if that group includes me and is an important part of the life of the church. We're advocating for a church whose ministries are more faithful to the gospel, more faithful to the church that we're called to be.
I'm fascinated by, as you've talked about, Covenant's reason for founding and Covenant's evolution from like appealing to the church in a certain way to like working within the mission of the church. Like the church itself has changed, and is it fair to say Covenant's relationship to the church has changed alongside it?
Yeah, I think so. I think necessarily simply because the vote, that we won those votes at a certain point in the history of the church and of the organization. But at the same time, there's always another vote, right? There's always more work to do. So you saw back in 2018, for example, there a couple of overtures where the church, having approved ordination for LGBTQ people and same-sex marriage, but approved them on sort of this local option basis. Saying you can do those things if you must. We won't stop you. But in 2018, the Assembly unanimously adopted resolutions that celebrated the gifts of LGBTQ people for ministry and affirmed the humanity and dignity of transgender and non-binary people. First time the church had taken any position on gender identity or trans and non-binary people. And so, we had more work to do. And even in this past General Assembly and in the voting that's happening right now in presbyteries on Amendments 24A and 24C, there's another opportunity for the church to say, inclusion of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities it's not really an optional part of our identity anymore. It is actually, a central thing that we affirm. We don't discriminate against people on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. We are in the process still of voting on changes that might include in ordination exams, the examinations people go through when they get ordained or installed. An intentional commitment to asking people about their commitment to the principles of representation, which means not only gender identity and sexual orientation, but race and ethnicity and sex and marital status, all of the things that have been used in the past to exclude or divide or discriminate. Now, if Amendment 24C passes, ministers or deacons or elders will need to be able to talk about what that means to them. And that to me is a good step forward for the church.
So I'm tempted to first ask, how gay tired are you? Because I'm about an 8 out of 10 right now. But
yeah, but I didn't get a great gay night of sleep last night. So
and what I mean by that, right, is that obviously we are in a very different place as a nation, right? And it feels like we are relitigating a lot of things we never thought we'd have to relitigate, right? And so, like, the right to marry, right? Our basic dignity as human people. And what I have found lovely in the Presbyterian Church is that I always say that you've made it when you're passed on the consent agenda. And that is, folks, if you don't know what a consent agenda is, I'm not going to tell you. Google it. You need to learn some parliamentary procedure already. But I mean, do you have any fear of because I mean, we've recently had, right, struggles within the church. We had to kind of push back a little bit. Do you think that's going to be more common, or do you think we might be over the hill?
I wish, Ben, that I could say I thought we were over those things, but I do not think we are over them. I think there is a degree of pendulum swinging. I mean, and every movement in the history of justice or civil rights progress has, it's been 2 steps forward, 1 step back in almost every case. I think we're at a really interesting moment. I mean, for a while there, I when I talked about the mission of the Covenant Network and kind of the state of LGBTQ progress in the church, I would speak about our biggest threat um, as complacency. Um,
Mm,
that the hardest situation for a lot of congregations is not to sort of deal with what the Bible says about sexuality. The the hardest situation for a lot of congregations is, didn't we already finish talking about that? Isn't that settled? Like, phew, that was terrible having to debate all those things. Thank God
right,
that's over with. And sort of say, wait, queer folks around the church do not yet feel safe and comfortable
right,
and
yeah,
equal. The LGBTQ people in your community, they don't see your sign that says welcome to our church and think you're talking to them. That isn't, we haven't solved that yet. We have a lot of work to do. And so complacency was the big threat. What I think the last 100 days or so have done in the church and in perhaps more than just the church is sort of reawakened um, some of the things that we really probably should have been more conscious of and more afraid of the whole time.
mhm,
Um,
That's a good way of
uh,
putting it.
and because there are some things being said out loud now that weren't being said out loud the last few
true, yeah.
years. Um, uh, but that doesn't mean they didn't exist. Um, and then I think there are also some new threats. I mean, particularly with regard to our trans and non-binary siblings, um, who are who are experiencing all manner of public policy
Mm-hmm.
indignities and threats, but also I think are sort of crying out, longing for to to see ways that the church, that the community that has in some cases embraced them, in some cases celebrated them, in some cases um, tolerated or accepted, but not celebrated. I think now is a moment where, I mean, queer folks broadly, but trans and non-binary folks especially, I think um, are in desperate need of hearing the church speak up in advocacy, in defense, in celebration, um,
And I think
and
too, I think the church kind of need like I'm I don't know. I'm having mixed feelings about institutional church these days. But I think because I think, you know, I don't understand. Like, I mean, like the church needs to push back against this narrative that there are things somehow in the human population that can literally destroy civilization, like just if one thing happens, right? Like somehow five people playing high school sports who are transgender is a threat to our existential existence, right? That's insanity. That's not normal, right? That is mentally unhealthy, right? To live in a world where you're constantly under existential threat, right? Um, but for some reason, despite all the evidence, right, that gay marriage hasn't hurt anyone. Nobody got divorced because of it that I'm aware of, unless I guess they were gay. And then, so we know that it didn't have that destructive mass moral corrupting effect that we were told it was going to have, but they sell the same line anyway. Meanwhile, we are literally watching actual moral decline tear the country apart. And we call that patriotism. So, um, you know, I wish the church would just say this narrative is bullshit, and it's time to accept that it's bullshit.
well, I wouldn't wait for that particular statement to come out of the office of the General Assembly right
What?
away, but I mean, I do think. I mean, actually, in support and defense of the Presbyterian Church's leaders through now and in the past, we have a pretty good record
Mm-hmm.
of passing social witness policies that declare Christian nationalism to be counter to the gospel, that declare religious liberty, not the way that word is frequently used now, but really
Have we
protecting.
called it heresy yet? Have we called it heresy,
Well, I
Christian?
mean, we have called out the advancement of political of white supremacy, of political superiority for one group in the name of Christ. That we've called that out in the past. I mean, we've
Sure.
got anti-Nazi statements in our Book of Confessions.
Sure.
Um, um, what I think we are still getting our head around in this moment in the church is how, in an age where our influence has declined as a church. So back to your sort of questioning, um, what I'm not sure how I feel about the institutional church. I mean, let's be honest. Let's name it. Members of Congress see Presbyterian Church USA on their caller ID, and it does not make them quake in their boots
Mm-hmm.
the way it once did, right?
Right.
And we have to figure out what moral leadership, what spiritual leadership looks like in an age where the power of the institution is so diminished. And so I have a lot of sympathy for our denominational leaders as they struggle to figure out what to bother putting their time into when it may or may not have as much influence as it once did. I will say again, with regard just the community that I'm working with right now. I mean, and this could apply to immigrants. This could apply to any number of folks in the current situation. But the community I work with is mostly members of the LGBTQ community, and it is the members of our community who need to hear this word from the church and from their pastors and from their regional church leaders. That is the place where folks are saying, please show me that I am actually loved, actually valued, and actually seen. So I'm hoping that we're on our way to that.
As you're talking about the cultural influence of the church and the fluxes it has, there's two stories that are coming front of mind for me. The first is my own becoming a member of the PCUSA, which happened in 2014. I'd been attending a church because it was the one Tualatin Presbyterian out in Tualatin, Oregon, as the one congregation that had a service before my spouse and I had to go to work on Sundays. And we were enjoying ourselves. We had not made any efforts towards membership. And the thing that pushed it over the edge for me was someone brought back the 2014 GA kind of big talking points after that assembly was completed. And one of them was, Brian, you may have to help me with my history, but I think it was basically codifying ordination privileges as well as membership privileges for LGBTQ folks in the
Well,
church.
in 2014, it would have been marriage. In fact, it was
Okay.
it was the freedom of individual congregations to host marriages and of ministers to perform marriages, which
Okay.
then was further codified by a vote in the presbyteries in the year that followed that. But even the assembly
Yes.
itself said that was their authoritative interpretation of the Book of Order, effective immediately, was that kind of wedding was acceptable, which was the first time we had said that.
Yes, and it was the first time I had ever encountered a church commenting on gay marriage, not only neutrally but positively. I'd only ever heard commentary that was very critical. And I was so struck by that was really made me sit up and be like, what is this place about? Because I think that they're serious about this mission to create real, true, inclusive space. So I was one of those hearts and minds changed by
and I'm
that
so glad
denominational
you're
work.
saying that, Annika, because often the line against taking steps of progress in the church, or even taking proactive positions in social witness, often the reason given is by moderates in the church is to say, well, we don't want to alienate people. It's going to hurt our membership numbers. It's going to drive away longtime faithful members of the church. People won't come join us. We need to take a lower profile. We need to be a little more purple, a little more sensitive to this broad diversity. But your story is actually the one I hear far more often.
Yes,
you did evangelism by taking a proactive position.
Exactly. I was gonna say that talk makes me crazy for exactly that reason, because I feel like I'm one of those folks who, I'm ordained as a reverend, and I also feel like the folks who I really do my most work with are folks beyond the church. And what I hear frequently is it's really refreshing to talk to somebody who who is really open and affirming and welcoming, because I don't think that people know we're here, which makes me crazy. But that's one story on my mind. And then the other story on my mind is a poll that came out recently of multiple mainline traditions, and how they voted in the 2024 election. And I can't remember which way the 48-52% split went in the PCUSA, but one of those stats was voters for Trump. Um, and those two pillars, I don't really know how to
They both seem like
reconcile.
high numbers.
They both, well, I mean, they are both, exactly. Regardless of which way that split is, it's a thing, right? It's a value split, a very big, deep one. And um, yeah, I don't have a grand synthesis of kind of my experience of the PCUSA as a really socially, open and experimental and theologically fearless organization. And the
Right.
reality that who's in your pews is also really going to vary, and that, the work we're doing does not exist separately from these other narratives that Brian and Ben mentioned, of fear and of scapegoating.
As you were saying that, I was my first church was the Presbyterian Church of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, which is the reddest place you can possibly be.
That's
And
where
I
we
found
met, by the way, Ben. I remember.
exactly right. And so that I found them because they had put themselves on a gay affirming website's list of churches.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the reason I am a Presbyterian minister right now, right? So that was not I didn't have a denominational preference at the time. I mean, I had basically just not been an atheist for almost, a couple of years. So, but no, I do. And the other thing is, as you were saying, I was thinking about the people that I see sitting out in the pews, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are the same people who tell me about what the Presbyterian Church used to be like, ferociously marching in the streets, getting arrested at rallies,
Mm-hmm.
being there for all these major kind of cultural moments. And they will tell you, right, that we developed a complacency, a comfort,
Mm-hmm.
when churches were getting kind of fat and looking for members wasn't hard. Um, and some of them have expressed to me that they are thrilled that we are struggling in this way, because we are finally returning to what the church was supposed to be, which was this kind of, you know, community centered, um, I don't know. Like, so they seem to think that, and I kind of agree. I think the church is sometimes at its best when it has less power.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I you know, to the numbers, when you say 48-52, what you're saying is we're the same as the rest of the country. I mean,
Right.
Right. Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
and that's right. We are. I mean, we
Hmm.
are not really a liberal church, and I think we probably need to just disabuse ourselves of that notion right now. We are a wide, vast collection of mostly small congregations, um, that is all over the map, and mostly not gathered for political,
Right.
um, alliances with the people in their pews. Um, but yes, I mean I appreciate the argument that we we may have some we may gain from being less institutionally powerful for a while. That we may be better off when we have to really decide what's important, when we have to, um, when our resources are more limited, and therefore we have to make harder choices about stewardship and where to devote our efforts and energy and money. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's easier to say than it is to live, because
Sure. Yeah. There's
as
carnage. There's
we
damage.
know exactly, and we're losing ministries that I think we all would agree are important and valuable, and um, but I do think, it's sort of like, in the work of the Covenant Network. I often People often want to talk about arguments. They want to have sort of an authoritative class on the 6 passages of scripture that purport to mention homosexuality, and how, and they want me to be able to argue uh, for inclusion biblically, theologically, and I can do that. I mean, I know about those Greek and Hebrew words. I could fill whatever hours of adult education time you want me to doing that. But at the end of the day, I've never actually changed anyone's mind on the issues.
Sure.
Teaching a class like that, um, I have, however, seen people change their mind and open their hearts on these issues, and it's always involved relationships. It's always involved stories. It's involved this not being about an issue or a biblical passage or a theological tenet, but rather about their niece or their grandchild or their pastor. And and that, to me, is in microcosm sort of what's happening in the church. We're recognizing that our real influence is not going to come from the pulling out the 5 million members card or the $8 billion endowment card. It's going to come from the degree to which we are invested in our communities. We are models of our faith. And I think that's where we might actually be able to see continued influence in the world. It's just not the kind of influence that maybe we at some point started to think we needed.
Right. I mean, people don't, I mean, sometimes we forget, right, that marriage equality nationwide in many ways was won at kitchen tables and over cups of coffee.
Right.
It was a concerted effort to have this conversation, right? To start talking to people, and that's what happens, right? Suddenly, you're thinking about your granddaughter. You're not thinking about the great political debate about, whether civil marriage is the same as religious marriage or whatever other crap, right? And so I think that's absolutely true, and I think if there's anything about this moment, I think that is encouraging me about sort of the institutional church, um, it is this idea that I think we've started to I don't know how to reassert the idea that there is power in community, that community is an essential sort of Christian ideal, right? So this idea that we are to be connected to our community and beyond our community, and I've heard a lot more about, and we've seen this in protests recently. Like the protests I thought were so great because it wasn't just about one thing; it was about everything. But it was still one united voice saying enough is enough of this, right? And so, I don't know. I have a bizarre optimism about the future of the institutional church. I think we have a lot to say in this moment, right? About the power of community to heal a nation, right? About the power of unity and those kinds of things, and radical peace, right? I think maybe I don't know. I think, Annika, you might have alluded to this earlier, because we don't get much airtime, because we're not a nutcase who is saying crazy religious things. So,
When I mentioned, like,
yeah,
yeah,
right.
that's the
So,
narrative people
how
know. Yeah.
I've been struggling with this, like, how do we elevate progressive Christian voices? I mean, we're trying obviously with this little thing here. But I don't think either Annika and I would say that we're necessarily a progressive podcast, right? We believe in peacemaking. If that's progressive, that's your business.
I think we are, which not by like design, just
Right.
because
Yeah.
we have such a militaristic culture that I think if you make a peacemaking contest, you become countercultural.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is different. Which is different though than kind of trying to position yourself. I think sometimes about why mainline denominations and denominations like the PCUSA that are more progressive are so reluctant to talk about it, and I think it might be because the dominant voices are just so absurd and so hateful that countering it feels a little bit like, are you giving them more of a platform? Are you validating this if you jump into this? Are you getting pulled down to their level if you comment on this? And I don't know, Brian, is that something Is that something you experience? You talk about at Covenant? Do you have the solution? Please tell us.
Yeah, here's the answer. No, I don't know the solution. I mean, I will say, and I want to make a distinction. There are people I have honest theological differences with on any number of topics, including even around sexuality and inclusion. And I do not think they are all extremists. I do not think they all
Right.
are absurd. And indeed, there's a place in the church for a range of views as well. It's just that the the dialogue politically, that and it is sometimes reflected in the church, takes everything to an extreme position that doesn't reflect even the sincere theological conviction so much as a belief that we have to that there cannot be compromise. There cannot be even listening to one another to understand what it is we would not be compromising with. Um, and that's not only problematic from a trying to function as a unified body standpoint. It's also problematic from a trying to change people's hearts and minds standpoint. I mean, one of the very practical questions I get asked a lot in the Covenant Network when I'm meeting with congregations is, okay, so how do we do this in a way that doesn't offend Mr. and Mrs. So and so? How do we do this in a way that we don't cause division? And you can't always live in fear of causing division. There are going to be people who just disagree with you about things, and but I do think there's a lot to be said for the value of making sure people know they've been heard, listening to perspectives other than our own, um, so that they then are freed, having been heard, to actually hear you. Um,
Mm.
and we don't have a lot of listening happening in the broader society, is my perception right now. Um, and we are at some pretty unprecedented places in our broader political system right now, so I understand why that might be true. But I I think in the church, at least, there still is a great need for us to be in conversations rather than just standing against them.
Yeah, I come across this too, and I think we talk about this a lot in gun violence prevention work, right? This idea that the no guns and all guns sides of this argument are small groups of people, right? There's a spectrum in between on which the rest of us fall, right? And the idea isn't necessarily right to not disagree. The idea is not to not, the idea is to say, look, I get it. My views are different. I understand that my views on guns are pretty extreme. I know that, right? But I'm not here to talk about my views. I'm here to help you talk about yours, right? So you tell me what you think, right? Where is the line for you, right? And so I feel because our political system right now is in this kind of I'm right, you're wrong, be quiet, right? And so we're not debating anymore. Like we're not having debate, which is bad for democracy. And so I think there is something to what you say, right? You have to, you can't do this kind of work if you're not going to listen to other people. Like, I mean, if you're not going to try to find ways to meet people where they are. Um, I mean, I survived living in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, right? You don't do that without learning how to navigate some difficult
Right.
situations. And so, and it's important for us too, right? To learn how to approach people with humility in these conversations.
Yeah, or you just won't be very good at it. I mean, and it's
Yeah.
you may be completely right, but um, the art of progress in certainly in deliberative bodies or in the church is getting beyond being merely right. You actually also have to be effective. You actually also have to cause people to hold their views that you think are wrong in a way that they might soften or change. Um, and it's again that's easier said than done as well. Annika, you mentioned the other hats I wear. One of the other hats I wear is working in journalism, very part time, but at the NPR station here in town. And after the last election, I think a lot of journalists were very frustrated because it didn't feel like any amount of reporting, any amount of attention to
Mm-hmm.
ethical boundaries, any intentionality about being objective or sticking to the facts mattered. That people who needed to hear differently, um, who needed to hear those facts, weren't listening to us, um, and it became this very frustrating thing. Like, why am I working so hard to tell the truth and be accurate if
Mm-hmm.
it's not really having any influence or impact? If there's nobody who actually wants the truth.
Right. It's demoralizing. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And especially because journalism is it's work. It's work. That kind
Right.
of research and reporting takes. There's so much behind the scenes for what you receive in a headline. So to do all
Exactly.
that and feel like, does anyone care?
Yeah. And I mean, so I think, on a church level, then, I think the question is, to what degree are we willing to invest, on the sort of the off chance we will be listened to, but also should we expect the same thing from others? Um,
Mm.
and if we're not listening to them, then we're probably not making any progress in the conversation.
As you're talking
So,
about,
oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
it's just as you're talking about deep listening and talking about that, yeah, the overlap between the work that goes into reporting and journalism and the work that goes into ministry and advocacy. Our last conversation was with two of the residents who help host the Lost and Found worship services. And when we were talking about what what makes for a well connected worshiping community, one pillar that was named was truth telling, like real good, honest, fearless theology, and also real good, honest, mutually trusting like conversation,
Yeah.
and the ability to tell each other your stories, even the parts that you may or may not be proud of, and even to and also to hear the facets of other people's stories that you may not relate to intuitively or immediately. um, and I think that's at play as you're talking about, yeah, how do you do this advocacy work that's deeply personal, and how do you break through these layers of fear and of confusion? um it's the same thing. It's being willing to speak openly and honestly and to listen deeply. I don't know, it's another, as Ben and I have noticed, this thread of relationships just keeps popping up with everyone we talk to in very different fields. And there
Right.
it is today.
Well, and the irony is that a lot of what I do is end up going to speak in places or preach or teach in places where I don't have a relationship with them, um, where they have asked me to come speak, and so there is some vested
Mm-hmm.
interest in hearing me, but but where I'm challenging them to exercise their gifts in the world of relationship without really having a relationship with them. So it is an odd little spot that people who do this work professionally, who do advocacy work, organizationally, um, it's much harder to do that. Now, I will say though, I mean, I do think some of the most important work I do is relational. Um, you know, the 26 years of ministry in the church, um, are a lot of what qualify me to do this work in the church. It's the relationships I have across the country. It's with other mid-council presbytery regional body leaders, with this network of pastors. Um, because honestly, I don't know that we ever change anyone's minds without trafficking in the world of relationships.
And I think maybe there is something too, though, about like, I mean, if you're there, you're not necessarily in relationship with these folks, but sometimes unfamiliarity makes them more willing to say things, right? And
Oh, for
so
sure. And
I
and
think
I can
some,
say
yeah,
things that their pastor can't.
Yeah.
right,
No,
yeah, yeah,
your relational rule is as an outsider, and that, yeah, uh we that's a strategy used in the world of chaplaincy frequently, but
Sure.
no,
And
yeah, there's
and
something about being a
business,
stranger.
you pay a consultant to come tell you something that that you already said, but
Right.
but because you've paid someone from outside to say it, now people listen.
Sure.
Yes, that does happen. I'm sure that's true.
Um. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say. So the through line for this podcast revolves around peacemaking. And I think I know how I would describe your work as peacemaking. I think this kind of theology and advocacy saves lives and saves souls. I think that there is something not only not only joyful and life giving, but also like life preserving about inclusive theology and about your whole self being affirmed. But I would love to hear too. How do you understand your work and your ministry and peacemaking all kind of coming together?
Well, I mean, certainly on the idea that peace, in this sense, is not merely the absence of violence or the absence of war or the absence of conflict, but is in fact something deeper and richer. It is about wholeness. It is about, it's shalom.
Mm,
It's the comprehensive, encompassing wellness and state of being with one another in community and um, shared affirmation of life. I mean, that to me is a biblical peace in the broadest sense. And so to that end, I think that's entirely what this work is about. It is about the church and every congregation and every relationship in the church and every person's life and how they conduct themselves outside the church, reflecting this shared affirmation of the presence of God in the life of every person, LGBTQIA plus and otherwise, and providing in the church a space for their identity to be celebrated, for their gifts to be used, for their love to be named. There couldn't be a better definition of peace, of shalom in the church than a place where that is what happens. Um, and so to me, this is peacemaking work in every sense. I think one might also say teaching congregations to navigate difficult conversations, um,
mm,
promoting the unity of the church, a unity that is authentic, a unity that is honest, a unity where we actually know each other fully as we are. Um, uh, that too is peace. That is an active uh, ministry against conflict and spiritual violence. Um, uh, and so to that extent, it's peacemaking in another way. Um, the ministry that I mean, there's advocacy we do, there's legislative efforts we make, there's education that comes down to a well-crafted PowerPoint and a good 45-minute adult ed class. But but if I had to say what is this ministry really about for me personally, it is about authenticity. It is about the church being for every person a place where they can be authentically who they are and have it celebrated, uh, because that is what God does. um, I served in the closet for many years. I was a pastor of a church for 13 years. And most of those years I wasn't out to the congregation. It was before the policy changed, and it was
mm,
before I was being honest enough with myself to really be fully honest with other people. Um, uh, what changed when the policies of the church changed, what changed for me in ministry, is when I was able to be authentic. When when I did come out to that church and people came to me with, you know, much love afterward. The hardest conversations were not with the more conservative people. They were not with people who were troubled spiritually by what I had told them. The hardest conversations were with people who were 100% supportive of me, who were completely affirming, and who were hurt that I had not shared
Mm-hmm.
this most important
interesting.
part of my life with them. You sat by my bedside, my mother's bedside, while she was dying. You did our premarital counseling. How could you not share this part of yourself? And you know what? They were right. I mean, there that was
Mm,
my ministry was compromised because I wasn't being authentic. And and there are a lot of reasons for that. The system was broken, but but authenticity in the church is what I'm hoping we can. All of this work leads us to a place where we truly don't have to even consider downplaying or hiding or
Mm-hmm.
questioning or soft selling the fullness of who we are in the name of someone else's idea of what makes for peace in the church. Authenticity is true peace.
So doesn't it? I mean, like I think as you were saying that. Well, first of all, I was having a flashback to the time my sister bawled her eyes out because she wasn't the first person I told I was gay. It was like my best friend, right? Like who else would I? Anyway, so but one of the things I've said about, one of the reasons I think inclusivity in the church is important is because we cannot ask people to enter this space inauthentically on purpose. We can't ask people to enter a sacred space and hide truth, right? Because
Right.
number one, God knows it anyway. So what the hell are you hiding it from, right? And number two, like we, that is to me like that is like genetic hypocrisy, right? Like I mean,
Yeah,
like that
if
is
you're
like
not here to
DNA, right?
if you're not here to seek truth, what the hell are you doing here?
Yeah,
Like
like why
that,
are you
yeah.
here if you're not here to find peace with yourself,
Well, and
right?
that's the spiritual wounding that was and is being done to queer people by the
Mhm.
church through the ages, right? I mean, that
Yeah,
is
right.
that more than a heresy trial. That is actually the problem. It's been
Mhm.
that we basically stood at the front of the sanctuary and told people to not tell the truth.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and I mean, I think one of the greatest acts of spiritual violence, right, was this idea that we were going to like force this sort of inauthentic chaos on an entire group of people, right? And say, yeah, you can play with us, but never say who you are, right?
Mhm.
And I still say it to this day. LGBTQ people don't lose their faith; it's stolen from them, or it's not offered as a possibility. And so, to me, like that is truly tragic. Um, and that's why I think this work is so important because that's the part of it that hurts people deeply, right? That's the
Yeah.
part of it that kills people, right? When you attack somebody, right, at that sort of deep place, and say your truth is not welcome here. Um, yeah, I mean, God help us. Like, I mean, yeah. I mean, so I see what you're saying. Like, authenticity is such a big deal. And being part of a community that has been forced into inauthenticity for so long, is, it's crushing. Um, yeah. And I'm not surprised a lot of folks don't return to church. I'm not surprised a lot of folks want nothing to do with it.
and it does fit alongside the rest of what I think people mean generally when they talk about peacemaking. I mean, it really does. Because all of that, whether you're talking about climate change or anti-gun efforts or uh, anti-war efforts, it is all about creating a certain kind of space, a
Hmm.
world and a church that reflect God, that reflect the the place that God envisions us being in together. And if we're not doing that, it isn't peacemaking. It isn't.
Mhm.
It isn't ministry. Really. So
So what what kinds of what kinds of things do you say to people when they say, "What do we do? What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do right now?" Um, yeah, I'll ask you first. I've been giving advice, but I'm not sure it's right.
well, I will not say that mine is going to be right as according to yours. I mean, to get by right now, you mean? I mean, to
Yeah, I guess
feel
to
like you have a sense
navigate
of
this
peace.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, on a certain level, it's the same thing we always do. it's, put one foot in front of the other, and keep moving forward, right? It's being able to say we have endured challenges before and we will endure challenges again. I think it's basic things like taking care of yourself and remembering who you are, and finding the community that you do have, and seeking solace and rest and strength there. Um, I do think, though, there are some things that we maybe need to do differently now.
Mm,
Uh, I certainly think this is a moment um, for acting with intention in the whatever context we have, wherever we can speak or act. This is the time where we need to do it. Um, and for some people, that means uh, writing letters to their elected officials. For some people, that means um, uh, volunteering for that uh, immigrant support program in your community that you've known about but didn't get around to being part of. Um, I think for others, it's going to mean sort of using this time to really bulk up your spiritual and theological and devotional life in a way that you are nourished for whatever comes next. Um, I find that right now I have actually listened to the news less
mm,
because that doesn't seem to help much.
right.
Um, uh, but I am spending more time reading and journaling, not because I think my journaling is changing the world per se, but because I need to be healthier,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
Right.
for whatever might happen next. The other thing, and the other thing this really is serious. I think we need to accept that it is okay to make a difference in one person's life. It is okay to make a difference in one event or one faith community, and not feel like the whole system is our responsibility.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
yeah.
we
To
had
not
a
devalue local work. Absolutely.
right. So we had I had a Covenant Network event. We do these regional events called Covenant Conversations, and they're based in a particular presbytery or a couple presbyteries. They're not a national conference. They're designed to have people from different churches in one area come together and worship and learn and do workshops and make connections that then can help them take the next steps to be more inclusive and welcoming. We had one of these that had been long scheduled. I don't think we were even paying attention when we scheduled it, for the Saturday after the election last November. And it was in South Carolina. Um, and uh, I don't know. I don't know how to characterize the mood. You could probably get a good sense of it. These were mostly progressive leaning folks meeting on the Saturday after the last election. Um, and there was some gloominess. There was some
Mm.
great concern about the future. Um, and we kind of named that at the start of the day, but we had work to do. We had workshops to have. We had worship to hold. But at the end of the day, I usually, before we do our closing session, I just say, what's one thing you learned today? What's one thing you're taking from this day? And there was a kid, I don't know, maybe 16, 17 years old, who was there. And they raised their hand and said, I was just talking to a friend of mine who's trans and who doesn't think they need to be alive. But I have seen things today I had never thought about and heard things, and I'm going to talk to them, and I hope that they'll realize that they do need to be alive. Um, and I don't know. I don't know anything else about that story. I just know what was shared in that moment. But I thought, you know, I can't do anything about a lot of things. But if this one event had that impact in that one person's life, that is not nothing. That is incredibly important. And we need to be allow ourselves to experience the joy and the gratitude and satisfaction of making a big difference in a small frame, um, or a little difference that doesn't solve the world's problems, but it is the thing that we've been given to do, and we've done it. Um, so I don't know. I think, Ben, that's a very long, complicated answer to what wasn't such a hard question. But I mean, practically speaking, it's about how we think about our role in the world right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been basically saying the same thing to folks, but I mean, like, on a practical side, I'm like, look, God put you in a place, God gave you gifts, use them in that place to build what kingdom you can, right? I mean, that's what we do, and then maybe the walls of those kingdoms will merge as we build bigger ones, right? And then maybe that starts to create the network of caring and love and community, whatever, or all that woke crap, right?
All that
But
crap. Which I think it is. I see. I think those it is converging on itself. Like we're getting better at thinking and talking in intersectional ways, and of recognizing the ways in which hey, true advocacy and equity for different sexualities and genders, but also for different races, also for different classes. Like, yeah,
but
I'm
you
with you, Ben.
you
I think
yeah.
the walls are coming together,
Right.
which is good, desperately needed.
Well, and I think we can't underestimate, because your story triggered a story for me. I think last year we had a transgender woman come to our church, which was blew us away because we're in the middle of nowhere. And so, but it was a communion Sunday. And as she came up to do communion, she looked at me and said, "I haven't been able to do this for 20 years." And as I was trying not to fall apart, right, because I'm trying to serve communion. And later I said to the session, I said, look, that matters. That moment matters. It matters so much. And it matters even more that that person knew to find you. How did they know who we are? And I'm like, so, never, never, never underestimate how much just being a welcoming presence impacts people around you that you don't even know, right? And just putting the energy out there, right? That we are a safe sanctuary space. And if we could do that, right, just as a minimum,
Absolutely.
like the basic of Jesus's love each other stuff, right?
If we could make our sanctuaries into sanctuaries,
Yes, wouldn't
is
that
that
be
the idea?
fantastic?
That'd be
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
It's small steps. These are all we ask. Yeah, that's a very powerful story, Ben. I appreciate your sharing that.
Yeah, it's and those things are happening every day in lots of places where people are being
Yeah.
nice to each other and just trying to create a better world.
Well,
So
and
that
I just, you're right. Those things do happen every day, and yet I think it is still possible to kind of float your way through the church and think that they don't, that
yeah,
and think that we're a liberal church. Trans people are welcome here. That they come get communion anytime they want to. What's the big deal? Um, but that story happens all the time. You
yeah,
know, the and I don't think churches even remotely recognize what an amazing gift they have to offer by doing something that is not very hard for them to do, but they have to do it with intentionality.
right.
It doesn't just happen.
Yeah. And you have to kind of come back to that idea of sharing your story and feeling like you have to tell people who you are and what you care about. Because Ben, I'm going to go on a limb and assume the church you serve, probably you present yourselves as a safe space for queer folks. Is that true?
Yeah, we are ferociously inclusive.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the question of how did this person find this sanctuary, probably looking for somewhere safe to go, and locating a space
But
willing to
but
share that aspect of themselves.
but you tell that story and sort of in contrast with the story of the uh, a couple that feels uncomfortable seeing a rainbow flag outside their church and therefore doesn't come.
Right.
And sometimes people want to present those two stories as parallels, like, well, we might gain one person. But what if we lose someone by gaining? Like, no, I want you to listen to the difference between those two stories.
Mm-hmm.
This is a person who has known the grace of God, who has experienced the welcome of the church, who has had power and position and privilege and compassion extended to them. And they are choosing to walk away from it because of discomfort, as opposed to a person from whom love has been withheld, acceptance has been taken,
Mm-hmm.
and who ventures in and experiences God's grace anew. Those stories are not actually +1, -1. This is a whole
Mm-hmm.
different new thing happening. This is the gospel. And I I think it actually puts that concern about, well, what about the unity of the church in proper perspective, to say this person is making a choice. This one is experiencing God's grace, and we can't really withhold this one
Yeah, and
because
and and I think there's an arrogance, right, in assuming that a transgender woman has a bunch of churches to choose from.
yeah,
Like,
That's what I was thinking
oh
too. Yeah,
yeah,
like one of the players in that story in that hypothetical is like, you're okay. You have other churches. Like
right.
if you
right,
want to really want to go to a church that's not addressing the reality of homophobia and transphobia,
right.
you've got
Well,
other
that's right.
churches. That's
And
not true
then,
for everyone.
and also, like, chapter 2 of that story may turn out to be that this trans woman who comes to your church actually also has incredible gifts for teaching fourth graders Sunday school, or
Hey,
you may
there you
find out
go.
that this person has a real gift for leadership and is an elder on your session before long, or maybe they actually know their Bible really well because those 20 years they felt excluded from communion, they've been studying it. And it could be that it starts as this opportunity for the church to be the church and extend grace, and that's a great story. But there's even another story, which is that the church gains from this person's gifts and presence. That um, not every story involving the church's ministry with LGBTQ people needs to have the church be the hero and the
Right.
queer person be
That's a
the
great point.
suffering
Yes.
the suffering victim that they have helped. They don't. That is sometimes the case, but that is not always the case, and it's really important to remember that too.
Yeah. You heard it here, sessions and nominating committees. If you're looking to grow your church, listen, get your flags out. Get your affirming stances out there, because
Well, I think people appreciate just not being wishy-washy, right? Taking a position, right, and saying we believe this.
Yes,
Um,
and not just queer people appreciate that.
yeah, everybody
everyone
does.
appreciate
Yeah,
that. Absolutely. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
yeah,
well, and
and
also I think it's also the right thing to do. It has the extra advantage of being the right thing to do,
right. Yes.
even if it doesn't result in a single new member joining your church. Even if the gays do not come flooding through the front door on the day you put the flag out.
Well,
Like,
exactly, because that transgender woman never came back again.
Mm,
But joined us for fellowship. We had coffee, we talked, and and the session said to me, kind of, you know how sessions are. Isn't it a shame they didn't come back? And I said, coming back was not important.
mm-hmm.
What was
Having communion for the first time in
that
20 years was
moment of
yeah.
validation was important.
well, and it's why things that we do out in the community are also important. So
Yes, right.
it's becoming more trendy, not trendy, that's not the word I mean, more popular, more widely accepted to have churches participate in pride parades and pride festivals. And I don't think it's anywhere near so common that it doesn't have impact anymore, because I think it still has profound impact on the church and on the LGBTQ community that sees churches present there. Um, and and even if not a single person you meet at the Pride Festival ever comes to your church, that has still been a profoundly important thing for the church to do.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Right.
and I just can't. And that's not just LGBTQ advocacy wisdom right there. That's church in the 21st century America
Sure.
wisdom. We cannot any longer spend all of our time worrying about what order we sing the hymns in and what the signage on the church is, and think that we're doing faithful evangelism, because that's not where we're going to make most of our connections anymore. We got to figure out
Sure.
how to do it outside.
You are a radical. You're messing with the hymns now. Woof.
I know. This is me. That's why I can't ever be pastor of a congregation again.
That's like the
I'm
third rail
thrown
of
off.
church politics, right?
Well, we won't get into that.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining
Yeah, this was
us.
a great chat.
This
Yeah.
was lovely. Is there anything else that we have not discussed about yourself or about Covenant Network of Presbyterians that you would like to share?
Hmm. Uh, well, I could talk for hours and hours about the Covenant Network. I'm so very proud of the board and of the journey that the organization's been on. We haven't talked very much about the stated clerk work, and I don't need to say a lot about it, except here's what I will say.
I had a whole question about that. I just didn't use it.
Oh
Oh, you
well,
should ask him. Unless that's going to open a new bevy, stated clerk to stated clerk. But I want to know what it is.
No, I've just been thinking about like, because at the Presbyterian Church, we're like an onion. Like we have so many layers, right? So we have, and we're the upside down triangle, right? All the power in the people and all that stuff. But we have these group of individuals like you and myself called mid-council leaders, right? And for non-Presbyterian folks, I don't know how to explain that to you. So,
I
but
always say that
basic,
I'm the stated clerk is in a regional body, and a presbytery or a synod is the senior officer of churchiness.
there you go. Right. Yeah.
Yes, it's a
Yes.
regional organization. If you're curious what synod you're in, find your stated clerk, and they will happily tell you. I feel confident about that.
But I mean, I personally I took a break. I came back to being stated clerk, but I see clerking very much as a ministry. I see it very much as a place to advocate. I think that our entire structure, right, is in some ways supposed to be about giving voice to the voiceless. I think clerks are kind of the guardians of that doorway in many ways, right? And so I've always been curious about how mid-council leaders feel about their roles in things like justice and peacemaking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Jay Herbert, right, was a bit of a change for us in a lot of ways, but also a refreshing one in a lot of ways. And but clerks aren't known for being, uh, you know, out there.
Except you, Ben.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, right.
no, I mean, yes, they aren't known for that, and there's some good reasons for that, because part of the job is to be
Exactly.
a facilitator of a process that is open to everyone and fair to everyone.
Right.
But I will say that I used to think those things were more separate than I think they are now. I I was a Presbyterian polity nerd before I was involved in advocacy and social justice work. I was a parliamentarian before I ever got involved with advocacy, and I used to think like the whole job of a state clerk was to be neutral and not have opinions on anything. I do not believe that necessarily anymore. And moreover, I think being aware and capable with the structures and the procedures of the church, and understanding that our polity, the things we believe about how we make decisions, is itself theological and is
Mm-hmm.
itself about giving voice to the voiceless, as you say, is about discerning the spirit at work and alive in a group of people, and it might lead them in a new direction, might lead them to seek justice in a new way. Um, that is stated clerk work, but that also is social justice work. It is the work of the church, and I think you can still do that in a way that's fair to everybody. I mean, I still advise people on how they would do something parliamentarily that I am personally opposed to, but I can still give them good advice.
Sure.
But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, um, helping the church use the tools of its history and its rules to accomplish mission, which is mission that is peacemaking and justice and love and compassion, um, is is good Presbyterian work, and I no longer see a conflict between being a stated clerk and being a faithful advocate for inclusion. In fact, on the contrary, I think they go perfectly together.
Yeah, I think I entered stated clerk work similarly. I mean, I was an advocate before I was a parliamentarian, but and an atheist before I was a Presbyterian. But and so but I used to think I have to be neutral, right? I have to I'm here to arbitrate, right? I'm here. I call balls and strikes. That's what I do. Isn't that the famous phrase, right? And I just used a sports metaphor. This is a red letter day for me. I've never
Break
done
it
that.
down, Wolves.
Go Royals.
So, what was I talking about? Yeah,
Sports.
Balls and strikes. Balls
right.
and
But then,
balls and strikes.
but
You're
then
right.
what I started to learn, right, was that clerks are, if there's anything we do, right, we're supposed to be reflective of our constitutional ideals. And the constitutional ideals of our church are pretty lovely, and I'm pretty proud of them. And so advocating for those is advocating for justice, because our Constitution is a living document trying to be more just all the time. And so, I get real gushy about this stuff, so I won't go on, and I'll start tearing up about being a stated clerk. Anyways, which no one does. Does anyone do that? Is that just me?
Right there with you, Ben.
Yeah. Okay.
I think
Good.
the stated clerks do. I think that's it's a call, right?
Yeah, we are a niche market. Yeah.
All right.
But yes,
Annika,
this has been a great
we've bored you
conversation.
enough with the polity talk. I apologize.
Never. Listen.
I'm just going to do a bonus episode of all nerds, like Presbyterian nerds.
Oh, can I come
what
back?
I'll do is I'll log off of this episode and we can do stated clerk to stated clerk.
Right.
You don't want to go down this road. That's going to change your whole podcast.
It gets real weird. You thought Hebrew was weird? Oof.
Yeah. You really want to get on all these Peace USA specific terms? Guess
no,
what?
Yeah,
no. But thank you so much, Brian, for coming on. And I will share with listeners, if you would like to learn more about the Covenant Network of Presbyterians, including potentially locating a faith community that is open and affirming and belongs to the Covenant Network of Presbyterians, go to their website, covnetpres.org. That is covnetpres.org. Links to their mission work, their resources, and their church map are all available. If you would like to donate to Covenant Pres and support the work they're doing, there is a donation button on the same website. And if you would like to learn more about the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, including listening to past episodes of this podcast, checking out our Lost and Found Church, checking out our working groups around gun violence prevention and peacemaking, go to presbypeacefellowship.org. And if you feel so led to donate to some of those efforts, there is a donation button on our site as well. Hope you've learned something meaningful in this conversation. Brian, thank you again for joining us. And
yes, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
No problem. Go in peace. Blessings.
Peace be with you.
Amen.